I'm now imagining the like walking competition at Swingtacular, but with moonwalking trolls. All right. It's clearly getting late, people. The jokes are getting worse. Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We're here to help train your eye so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 22 years. I have about 24. Tonight, I believe the topic is the hierarchy of musicality, which is going to be a fun one to talk about. Might not be what you're expecting, but it'll be fun, promise. So we're looking at the video of Markus and Tren from So Swing
2019, I believe.
Yeah.
Do you want me to share the video before you talk?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, cool. Link is in the
chat. Songs, watch the whole thing.
Yes, watch the whole thing. Link is in the chat. When you get done, we will talk musicality.
Before we get into the screen sharing, I have a little bit to talk about. I have quite a bit to talk about tonight, actually. we called it the hierarchy of musicality, but we're kind of going to be focusing on what kind of musicality should you be focusing on based on your skill level. I'm going to be referring to novice, intermediate, advanced, all-star, but I don't mean your WSDC level. I mean just your skill level in terms of like, where would you be regardless of where you're at with WSDC?
Like which classes would you feel the most comfortable in to improve?
Exactly. What I won't necessarily be addressing specifically is champions, just because I don't think that that's a super relatable thing to talk about for the majority of our audience. So we're just going to be talking up to All-Star, basically. So we've been talking the last couple of weeks about musicality as well. And I think one of the main things that we've kind of emphasized is like not rushing. And that is something that we have addressed previously for different reasons that it can be happening. But the other thing that I want to mention is that, a lot of times that can happen when somebody is trying to do something that's too advanced for them. Or what I should say is they haven't built the skills required to work into that movement or whatnot.
Yeah, let's talk about that at the end.
We'll talk about that at the end.
That's an awesome question, Erin.
Yeah, great question. Like I was saying, a lot of times the rushing will happen because you haven't developed the skill level to incorporate certain movements into what you're doing. A lot of times, the other reasons that something will kind of look just rough in general, like when you're watching Jack and Jill's from any level, you have those dances that you're like, okay, that was like a really nice dance. And you have some dances you're like, ooh, that's a little rough, but what makes that rough dance happen, it has to do with timing and technique as well. And I say technique, I mean just what I said previously is you don't have enough that you can build upon to work with that, but it creates an issue with the timing, which is why it looks a little bit rough. If you don't have the correct technique, a lot of times that's what it will do is throw off your timing and things start to look really slow and or really rushed. It just doesn't look right. It doesn't look like it's in sync with the music a lot of times. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that like bad communication is something that can also cause issues. And that's something that I think quite a few people want to rush into doing, all the fun things, all the styling things, right? But if you don't know how to communicate that to your partner, it's going to cause more problems than, creating like something fun, which I think is what most people are trying to do, right? They're trying to make something fun and like relate it to the music, but it creates more problems when you don't know how to communicate things correctly. And I think that's something that you have to work on at a certain stage. And that also will cause people to choose inappropriate timing to place things into their dancing in terms of like styling, in general, and just like adding on to things, altering patterns, things like that. It will create inappropriate timing choices for that. if you haven't built upon something. Ideally, if you want to add or change things, they should really like flow into the movement happening already, or they should happen at a time once the momentum has paused or dissipated. There's not a lot of momentum happening at that moment. Those are kind of the two ideal ways to incorporate things into dancing. None of this is like, like hard rule, whatever. This is very generalized and it will vary for each person. But, I think that for a lot of people, it can be hard for them to know what they should be focusing on at their level and, or like, where they should maybe be focusing on placing things and trying to add things, all of that stuff. So like I said, this is all generalization.
Mhm.
So please don't be offended if I, say something that you're like, well, that's not my situation.
Right.
It might
And
not.
like,
Okay.
unless you've mastered the existing rules, it's harder to break them. You need to break rules that you know, as
Yep.
opposed to just flailing about the floor.
To add on to that, the best way to start breaking rules is to do things like really, really slowly, right? So start adding very small things in that are variations to what you're already doing, like your basics, what you have learned as a general, this is what everyone should do. A lot of times I know that for newer dancers and even like, dancers that have been around for a while, I think that watching champions, it gives you the sense of like, wow, I can never do that. And I think that if you don't already have a decent amount of dance experience, watching champions is really hard to relate to. So I wanted to give you guys a few examples for both leads and follows that are more like all-star level. Some of them are kind of like in between all-star champ, depending on the event, whatnot. But they're usually like all-star-ish level, I would say. If you want to like go watch these people, you'll be able to pick apart things that you can take and use in your own dancing a lot easier than if you go and watch champions and try and take what they're doing and put it into your own dancing. It's a lot simpler. And I don't say that in a bad way. It's like all of these dancers that I'm going to, mention are wonderful dancers. And that's exactly why I'm recommending them. But, champion is just an entirely different beast. Sure, let's put it that way.
All wax, can of worms. Can of worms. I like that one.
Sure, that works. So for follows, I would recommend Lisa Picard, Lindsay Mistretta, Sayaka Suzaki, Alexis Garish, and Estelle Bonaire. All of them have really clear musical choices, and they communicate it very well. And on the lead side of that, Thomas Carter, Pavel Katunin, Jung Cho, Stanislav Ivanov, and Alpha Vo are all really great to go watch and see how they communicate things, how they choose to style things. Everyone is very, very clear about what they're doing generally, and they just have some really, really fun choices that they make that are really simple, and they add a lot to the dance. So that's my recommendations for kind of all-star low level champ around there. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that for follows specifically, one way that you will have issues when you're trying to play around with things is if you're not decisive enough. You cannot communicate something if you don't know what you're doing. That's just how it is. A lot of times you will see wishy-washy movement, and what it looks like is it doesn't look like it's on time. It looks like it's either behind the music or ahead of the music. And that's when you're not being really decisive, either decisive about what movement you're doing in the first place, or decisive about like where you're placing your body parts as you're doing so. But yes, that is like a big issue for follows specifically. It can also be an issue for leads, but I would say follows specifically, if you're not being decisive enough, if you want to play around with something, it's really hard to communicate that.
Do you want to relate the like novice, intermediate, advanced, like the actual what you're looking for before we go into the screen share?
So for newcomer and novice, your focus would be on really keeping patterns on time and staying in sync with the music. That is something that if you watch novice and newcomer, isn't always the case. So that should be the focus, right? A lot of people, especially when you first come into dance, you want to learn all the things, right? And you want to try all the things. But you want to focus on keeping things more basic and really just focusing on just the basic swing time, right? Or swung time. um, so that's what I would say newcomer novice. For intermediate, I would say that the focus would be on adding and styling at the beginning and end of patterns and anything that's really emphasized in the music. So something like a break in the music or extended words or notes or like a really strong beat that you hear somewhere. Those are the things that you should be focusing on if you are wanting to play around with musicality. Now, for advanced dancers, I would say that the thing you should be focusing on is really adding like large or simple pieces of styling within patterns. And this is the level that you should be focusing on communicating to your partner, because this is now when you're adding something into like the middle of something, like when something is happening, you need to communicate that better. If you're adding something at the beginning and the end of a pattern, you don't have to communicate it as clearly, I would say, just because generally you will have a visual right at that point. So if you're at the beginning and the end of the pattern, right, you're usually facing each other, not always, but generally. So you have more of a visual reference there. However, if you're in the middle of doing something, that's when you need to communicate better. You can't rely on visual as much as you can if you're at the end of the slot. Now, all-star level, I would say that the focus is really on syncopating most movements. And that does not mean doing all the things. Want to be clear about that. That does not mean doing all the things. It just means making all of the movements make sense within the context of the music, right? So like I've said previously, like you want to see the music when you're watching a dance. So that's what I mean by that, right? Is like really syncopating all of those movements, even just the steps that you're taking. I know when we talked about Tessa and Ben, I had acknowledged quite a few times there were some like passes that Tessa did where her footwork was slightly different in order to fit the music better. And that's what I mean, right? Is that, you know, those small things that need to be altered, but it is a constant thing. It's not quite like at the intermediate advanced level where you're putting things in certain places to be really musical. At the all-star level, the majority of your dance should be pretty musical. I think that's all I needed to say in my preamble now that we are at 7:20.
Okay, I would like to add just like two things, but
Go
I'll
right
try
ahead.
to be fast. So first of all, depending on when you started learning West Coast swing, the idea of communicating your styling to your partner might be a newer concept to you. Because I know when I started, I was trained in the like refrigerator door exercise, where my independent styling and play was not supposed to affect my partner through the connection. While that is still a tool to have in your toolbox, because it can be useful at various times, that is not the foundation of our musicality anymore. The connection has changed and evolved, and we want to almost have constant connection with our partner, and being able to communicate our movement, especially when it goes against what the norm is, the basic, it's really important to communicate that to your partner. Mm-hmm. So just wanted to get that out of the way. If that's new information to you, that's why, because this dance has evolved so much and it keeps doing it, and it's great. And then I was wondering if we could relate this hierarchy analogy to the cake layer metaphor we used last week. And I'm going to give it a shot and you can tell me if I'm right or not. How about that? Cool. All right. Experiment time. Are we doodle doing? Oh, we will. We'll get there, Erin.
Shortly.
So last week we talked about musicality throughout a whole dance as like a layer cake, and you want your foundation to be clean, simple, not too much going on. But the more advanced you are, the more bougie you can be with your basics, basically, right? So I'm imagining like a novice newcomer cake, like home baker can make a layer cake. It's delicious. It looks okay for an Instagram photo. But then you think of like all-star layer cake. That's going to look like it came from a fancy bakery, and every detail is going to be like on purpose, and it's not only going to be tasty, but it's going to be amazing looking. Regardless of what level you're at, you still want to think about all those layers. You're just thinking it at a level based on what your ability is, but all those layers are still there. Are we on the same page?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Cool. All right, to the screen share. All right, can you sense movement?
Yes, I can.
Excellent.
So we're basically going to be talking through this dance and kind of pulling out different pieces of what you can take at each level and use for your own dancing. Because I know that in terms of newer dancers, or, you know, even like intermediate advanced dancers, it can be hard to kind of extrapolate that from a champion level. So we wanted to do that for you. So now this first movement here, we have some like syncopated kind of chest pop things going on, which I would consider to be somewhere around intermediate advanced.
Yeah, agreed.
I wouldn't say it would be strictly intermediate or strictly advanced. I would say it'd be somewhere in between there, depending on what you can already do. Just because of the movement, specifically the isolation, that's something that creates, or you need a little bit more control to be able to do that. So because of the movement specifically, I would say it'd be somewhere in between intermediate and advanced that you can kind of pull and use that on your own.
Another element to consider is that in this hierarchy of advancing your musicality from novice to advanced and above, at your more beginner levels, you're really focusing on individual. And you grow into partnered. So that's why solo dancers who like come into West Coast Swing and suddenly like sweep through all the competitions, even though they've maybe danced West Coast for 2 weeks, right? They can do that because they have that solo ability, but they don't quite yet have that partnered ability, which is something that they will then have to learn. But solo movement comes before partnered movement, because partnered movement is much more complex.
Yep. It's a lot harder to learn because, like I said previously, is that communication aspect. So, I believe right after this, we're going into like a breakaway moment. So we have a breakaway moment here. Now, in particular, I would say that this would be more of an all-star thing because the breakaway is a little bit more complicated, and because you don't have any physical contact, you really have to rely on visual contact, and being able to mirror each other or work off of each other is something that can be a little bit more complicated. So I would say in general for like this type of breakaway specifically, it'd be a higher level thing.
Yeah, and part of that is also like once you have arrived at those higher levels, all-star and up to champion, you have already proved that you know what you're doing. So you have earned the right to bend the rules more competitively. Whereas if a partnership did this in novice, this long of a breakaway would probably dock you competitively.
Yeah. Agree. And I think that at that point, like, it's also hard to know what to do. And I know, like, even at like advanced levels, I know some leads, some follows say, you know, when their partner is doing something, it's hard for them to know what to do while they're waiting or, you know, trying to see what their partner is going for.
I have a thing I want to say.
Go ahead.
But I'll let you go first. If you don't know what to do, that means your body has stopped moving. You're not dancing anymore. If you have the built-in rhythm and basic technique for just basically tripling underneath yourself and traveling, that should become your inner metronome. So like if you're a musician, you're tapping your toe to keep your time, right? With us dancers, we need to have our rhythm and our movement baked in, so it keeps going. Even if intellectually we're shocked for a moment in time.
Yep.
Because I know that happens to me when I'm leading sometimes, because I am privileged to get to dance with really amazing follows, and they'll often do things where it short circuits my brain, because the follow part of me is like, I need to steal that. But then that turns off the leader part of my brain for a second. But thankfully, because I have that inner technique and rhythm metronome, I'm still dancing while my brain is short circuiting.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Soapbox over. So what level would you call this transition for Tren from strutting to skipping? What, because it's a really great phrase change. It's a phrase change, right? Yeah.
It is. I would say in particular, just that, not the fact that they are, in a breakaway, I would say that it would be intermediate level.
Cool. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Because it's such a simple thing that she does.
Yep.
I went too far. I went too far. Oh, I didn't make a bookmark. That's my problem. Okay. Because she's,
Struggles.
America's Next Top Model strutting, which has one very particular kind of like musical vibe to it. But then she starts skipping when the phrase change happens, and it's so simple, but it's a beautiful acknowledgement of how the music is changing.
Yep. It adds more energy to the movement, even though the movement is pretty similar to what she was doing previously, but it just adds more to it. So yes, I would say apart from the fact that they are in a breakaway position, that would be intermediate level. That's something that intermediate you can take and put in your own dancing. Generally for follows, I would say that'd be something in like a pass of some sort.
Yep.
So this right here is really fun.
Love it.
Yeah. I love the way that Markus leads it. And I would say in general, because of the isolation, this is a high level styling. Now, I will say that if there was less styling to it, it'd be something that you could do at like intermediate advanced level. But just the way that they're doing it, the technique that they're using, like it's a very hip hop style. So there's a lot of isolation and popping happening. And that's a high level thing generally. So
yeah, it's a hip hop double resistance, essentially.
Pretty much, yeah.
And they're both also doing really great kicks and digs underneath themselves.
Yep.
So it's not just the popping in the shoulders. It's whole body. And that's where the technique comes in, because this movement has a very specific cause and effect through the body. And that's what we're talking about when we say technique and timing. Because if that cause and effect isn't happening the way it's supposed to, different parts of your body will hit at the wrong time. And that's why it feels off when you watch it.
Yep. Agreed. I also want to mention digs that you said. Can you go back just?
Yes. Let's find a dig. Look at that. Look at that.
Yep, right there. So Markus's left foot, Tren's right foot. Those are digs. It's basically the other thing you might hear is like a forced arch. It's when you are placing the toes on the ground and the rest of the foot, the heel is coming up over them.
Yep.
And that is like a hip hop styling generally. Not always, but because of the angle of it, it tends to be something that's more hip hop.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going into pretty normal pass. And I like that they're going back to that, honestly. A lot of times at higher levels, you don't see going back to those basics as much. So I like that they are adding that in.
Yep. But then very quickly, but wait, there's more.
Yep.
I just, as an aside, I love the way Markus, as a leader, chooses very specific moments, but to really just take the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish more leaders not only had the skill to do that, but the confidence
Yeah.
to do that, because it balances the partnership in a really beautiful way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Something that Markus is really good at is, especially like when he's dancing with Tren, is really letting her do her thing, but then taking a moment every once in a while for himself.
Mm-hmm.
But it's never like at an awkward moment. It's always something that makes sense.
Yep.
So once again, that breakaway, I would say higher level. It was more okay, in my opinion, for advanced than the previous one, because it's not quite A, as long of a breakaway, and B, as far apart.
Yeah, because they come to an anchored position and then he just
Yeah.
lets go.
Yeah. And the way that Markus goes about leading that, he makes sure that she's in a spot where he can release her and she's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times when you got to kind of the end of the slot here, in theory, there should be, some tension, enough so that like if you release, you're going to at least, stumble back ever so slightly.
Yeah. And he's actually releasing on her slightly forward movement towards him, which makes it a lot safer, as opposed to him doing that right after reeling her out. That's mean. Don't do that.
Yeah. So he releases in a good moment that she can take control over herself completely. And I love that she kind of copies what he's doing as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fun. She does it in her own way, though.
Yep. And that's that partnering level, because like having the ability to react in real time to your partner's musicality and follow along with it or add to it, that's very high level, because that's not just technique and timing. It's having practiced it so much that your brain can be focusing on those high level things while your muscle memory is handling everything else.
Yep.
When you trust your muscle memory like that, that's also kind of like how Brandy says, trust your technique. Because once your technique gets to a certain point, you don't need to focus on it as actively anymore, and you can focus on other more complex things when you're dancing.
Exactly. I actually want to add in that when we had our short lead panel, you would have heard a lot of them saying like, oh, I don't really think about that as much. And that's exactly for the same reason, because of that muscle memory they have. They don't have to think too terribly much about what they're doing. So out of that breakaway, we just had something pretty simple that I would see at a novice level. But now we're going into this here. Now, this duck, I would say, should be about an advanced level.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah. However, what we're doing afterwards, I would say should be an all-star level. I mean, you can do a version of this at lower levels, but the way that they are really hooking around each other and that she is totally releasing that weight on her feet.
Defying gravity.
Exactly. So that's something that you really have to know exactly where the body weight should be in between the partnership, which is why this specific thing is something that is more of an all-star level. Instead of saying like, oh, you could do a dip at intermediate advanced. Of course you can, but just the way that they go about it, because she releases her feet entirely. So she really doesn't have any weight on the ground. Like that is something that is high level.
I think that's literally one of the most stable dips we have analyzed on this show.
I think so.
And this is like our 53rd episode.
Yep, exactly. Ooh, I do want to add in though. Can you go back for like a second?
Oh, me too. There we go.
So I mentioned decisiveness earlier in terms of follows. Tren is being pretty decisive here. However, it's not the most decisive that she could be, because the way that she's placing her feet, there's a little bit of like movement. It's not like sticking into the ground, sticking into the ground, sticking into the ground. It's not quite as decisive as she could be, which is not wrong. I just wanted to mention that and point that out because I had mentioned the decisiveness earlier.
Yeah. It's just like a skosh muddy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
That is where, if you get to that level, you have the right to make artistic choices about the way you want your dancing to look.
Yep.
And if you like this look, awesome.
Yep.
If you prefer being sharper or hitting much more, I don't know, strong lines, also awesome.
Yep. I did just want to point it out so you could kind of see a good example of what I meant by that decisiveness.
Yeah.
So we're back here to a nice simple underarm, which I would say is novice level. I would say the way that they're coming out of it, probably more intermediate level.
Yeah.
Just because of the traveling to the side that they're doing.
And then voila.
This you should do if you're a champion.
Or
and if you're
bionic. Yeah, that's my final word. You got to be bionic to do this one.
The way she does it is actually fairly simple, but because of the timing that she does it at, like, it can be risky if you're not at the exact right moment to do it, or if your partner isn't paying attention to you. So
I also just want to highlight the details she adds when she's down there.
The shoulders.
Because she doesn't stay square. She lets her right hip cock up to really sit into that pose, and then she like pinches her right abdominals together and tips her shoulders and shrugs her left one and then shrugs her right one while looking at the audience. Like it this face says it all. Agreed.
Actually, let me explain what she does, basically, just so we're all aware. What she does, so that forced toe that we were talking about earlier, the dig, she basically does that with that right foot, and then she drops down onto it. So that weight is going directly into that foot. Now, the left leg of hers, it's bent in the front. It's there. It's not really taking much weight, because if she had weight on that, it would be tilted too far forward. She would fall forward. It needs to be a direct drop down onto that forced arch into the floor, that dig. Otherwise, it's not going to work out.
Yep.
Like I said, this is a very champion level thing.
Yep.
But if you're wondering how she did it, that's how. And Aaron said, we need a lore keeper of laughs tracking all the goober moments so we know. Actually, I want to add in that the attention that Markus has to Tren when she does that should be happening at every level.
Yep.
Should be.
Agree. And I also
not saying
appreciate
it does, but it should be.
how he chooses to travel around and past her, so she has plenty of recovery time.
Yep.
And while that, again, should be a thing at all levels, it has a tendency to only appear in high advanced into all-star. To the tears heard round the world, follows everywhere. We just want a break, man.
Oh, so true.
Oh, we have another breakaway?
Yep. This breakaway in particular is, again, really high level, because we're breaking away with our backs to each other. We don't know what the other person is doing, but in particular, because they are a partnership, they pretty much know that they can trust the other person to do, what they think they're going to do. But if you didn't know the partner that you had, I wouldn't suggest breaking away with your back from, facing each other. That's not the best idea.
Yeah. That being said, the stylings that they're doing distinct of the breakaway are things
Mhm.
you can learn
Yeah.
at a lower level. It's the breakaway element added to it that's making
Yep.
it more advanced.
Exactly.
Because like, especially as a follow, if you're ever led in a sugar tuck that ends up being a free turn, you
Mhm.
then have 2 to 4 counts where you can just play. And this is the kind of thing that's a really great element to add when you're momentarily broken away from your partner.
Yep. Yeah, and both of the stylings that they do are pretty simple. I
Mm-hmm.
would say possibly intermediate, advanced
Yeah,
levels. Now, this in particular is definitely more like all-star level, just because, once again, the technique that she uses for it.
right.
Now we're going back to something very simple that we should be seeing at all levels, getting into just a plain anchor, a little bit stylized based on the music. And I say that because it's not super smooth as an anchor. There's a little bit of choppiness to it, but it's intentional because of the music. The music isn't really smooth.
Mm-hmm.
So, getting into these hip catches here. Now, this is something that you should learn pretty early on, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And just
the
develop more
styling part of it.
fine tuning
Fine
over
tune
time.
it.
You're welcome for that word. I'm here all week, people.
But yes, the pattern in general, you should be learning pretty early. I would say most people are going to learn that probably when they're a novice-ish,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Novice intermediate.
But the way that they go about it, the style of it, it's a little bit higher level
Mm-hmm.
because they have some kind of popping at the end of the movement, right? So once they get their weight over 1 foot fully, there's like an extra ha with what they're doing. That's a
Mm-hmm.
little extra pop. That in particular, I would say is probably more advanced-ish.
And the other thing that makes it more advanced is it's a callback to that hip hop double resistance that we saw earlier.
Yeah.
It's very similar styling and technique. That's
Mm-hmm.
tying the musicality of your entire dance together.
Yep.
And then with great power comes great responsibility. This is one of those things. I think this to me is what chugs are to you. I think that's because, like, when a partnered arm worm is done well, it's great. But how often is it actually done well and doesn't kill either partner?
Fair.
Yeah. So do those with great caution, is all I'm saying.
This one in particular, well done.
Yes.
I like the added styling hand at the end by Tren. However, based on the attention you have to pay to your partner at this point, I would say this is pretty high level.
Yeah. Oh, so this is funny. This is mindset stuff as a dancer, because you'll have like certain values that you prioritize above others. But for me, I will often, if it seems necessary, I will sacrifice my personal aesthetic choices for the aesthetic of the current partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, this kind of arm styling is not something I ever do in any serious kind of manner.
Right.
Usually it's a joke. It's great. I don't do it competitively. But if I am on the other end and my partner instigates it, I'm going to follow through on that.
Yeah.
Because to not would be more awkward.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say that for follows, if you don't feel like following something, don't follow it.
Yes. You are 100% within your right to not follow anything you so choose.
Yep.
So it's getting late. Should we move on to the second song, or is there something more in this first one you wanted to go
We can
over?
move on.
All right. Wisconsin.
So the fact that they start this in a breakaway, once again, this is something you can get away at high levels.
Yeah.
Like, You can't get away with this at low levels.
Right. And part of that is not just the skill level, but it's also the intimacy.
Yeah.
Right. Because like, oh man, I remember I was like new to advanced or something, and my partner in finals tried to do something like that with me. I think it was even a heated final. It wasn't even a spotlight, Alicia. That's how bad this was. And they tried to do something like this with me, and I'm like, this is not a mating dance. Can we do some basics, please? It was so awkward, especially since they were, you know, a lot shorter than me because I am me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Fun times.
Consider your partner's emotional health, everyone.
So this groove that they start out with, I like it. It's super simple. It's something that you should be learning to do as soon as you start learning West Coast, because in theory, this is like the groove is what you generally will do at the beginning of like a starter step, or you know, just at the beginning of your dance.
And
the only difference is that they're going to break away.
Yeah, that's your internal technique metronome that you just got to keep going.
Yep, exactly.
And it's a way you can communicate to your partner, because often, even though the techniques are similar, depending on how you choose to like style it, there are slight variations in that metronome. And that's why a lot of the more advanced dancers start dancing in closed position before the music has even started.
Right.
Because either they're like really excited to see each other and they know each other really well, so yeah, fine. Or they're just trying to get on the same page before the music starts.
Yeah. So this right here, because of the way that he has the arm and everything, this should be intermediate advanced. Don't try it at novice level.
Nope. And I would actually argue at least advanced, personally.
Yeah.
Especially if you're dancing with a partner of a size that you're not familiar with. Because this is getting led in this by even all-stars has been dangerous for me in the past, because they don't actually create the space for me to not die.
Yeah.
And I guess one detail I want you to pay attention to is, as soon as Markus gets a hold of Tren's bicep, that hand goes up.
Yeah.
It does not actually go that way. It goes up. So that way Tren can swing through and underneath it. A lot of leaders tend to go yoink, and that's where the death happens.
That's true. He's keeping her arm in that shape that it started in. He's not trying to force it out into a different shape.
Yeah, it's an illusion that it travels down the slot. It's only an illusion based on her traveling.
Yeah. I love his styling choice.
I know. Also, another excellent hotel pose. I was saying last week that Parker's is like one of the best in the biz, but this one, also beautiful.
It's good. Love how long he just stays like that.
Right? I would lose the blood in my hand if I held it up that long. I say that jokingly, but I'm actually getting serious.
So Tren just did a little bit of a styling into this anchor. And the way that she does it is something I would say is going to be maybe advanced, most likely all-star.
The displacement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason that I say that is because she brings the foot, that right foot, up under her and puts the weight on that. But at the same time, she's releasing that left foot and moving it, right? So we have a moment where she really doesn't have too much weight on the ground at all. And that's why I would say this is a high level movement in particular.
Mm-hmm. It has roots in gliding, like,
Yep.
and kind of similar to moonwalking, if you're not
Yep.
familiar with the term gliding. But if you have gotten to the advanced division competitively and you do not know how to moonwalk yet, fix it.
Yeah, you really need to know how to do that.
Yeah, just saying. Especially if you're a follow, like that technique comes in handy when you're scrolling away from your partner.
It does.
So often.
Yeah.
Because it allows you to be much more in control of how much rope you have.
Aaron said very aggressively, working on moonwalking.
Yes. I'll be waiting to see everyone's moonwalks when we can be in person again. We shall
be surprised
have...
how frequently it comes up. So we have a pretty normal pattern going on here. However, Tren styles it quite a bit. And she does so with the footwork. She's taking extra steps. She's not only taking extra steps though, but the way, like, the placement of the steps is very different than you would expect. Like, it's really like hooking behind quite a bit, which is not a natural movement. And it's especially not a natural movement when you are rotating necessarily.
But it is a good one to build into your muscle memory.
Yeah.
As you gain skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would say that her styling right there is probably an advanced level styling.
Mm-hmm. Especially at how smooth transitioning in and out of it was.
Right. Exactly.
And how little it negatively impacted. Like, it didn't negatively impact the connection, is what I'm saying. Like, Markus could probably feel the slight variation in her timing, but it wasn't like affecting him in a bad way.
Exactly. Can you go back? So I just wanted to acknowledge, like, getting into this anchoring position here. So because they're traveling towards the audience, basically, this is like where you would probably start playing around in intermediate, styling wise, because it's not a normal, like, anchoring position that they're going into. Tren is taking a really large step to her left, and Markus is kind of bringing the foot in front of him as he steps with that left foot.
Yep.
So those are, like, at the beginning and the end of the slot, or the pattern type things that, you know, simple. Those are things that you would start adding in intermediate.
Yep. We should do an episode on slot width.
Yeah.
Just popped into my head, because they're really taking up a lot of width with this whole dance.
Yeah.
Which is great, especially when you have the space. But if you think of more like classic swing champions, like if you were to watch Mario and Marianne Nunez, for example, they would just be living on two squares basically the whole time. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just that
it's different.
Yeah, they're just different.
Though I will add into that nowadays, generally, if you are in a spotlighted situation and you are not moving, like width-wise, you're gonna get kind of docked for that.
I would agree. Unless you were like Marianne Reborn or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you don't take up as much of the floor as you can in a spotlighted situation, generally you'll get docked for that. However, I will say, in general, that's not something that you need to have as a part of your skill set if you're just social dancing. It is something that is specifically for spotlighted situations.
Yep. Which can make it hard to, like, practice, because if you tend to just social dance, you're social dancing on a crowded floor, and it just makes it harder to practice movements and patterns that actually travel anywhere.
Yeah. There's certain things for spotlights, comps specifically, that you need to practice with a partner. on a non-social floor.
Yeah. Like telemarks, which we're talking about next week. Please subscribe. Sorry, can't help myself.
So I want to say now that this movement that Tren does is something that's really, really simple. And I would say a lot of times you're going to get this movement like at like intermediate levels. Not that I'm saying you should, but you probably will in terms of that, the monkey bar thing. But the way that she chooses to style it is one of the most simple ways that you could style it.
Simple, but not necessarily easy because of how much control it requires.
Right. She sits into it and then she just rotates. And a lot of times that can be easier on the body than doing a like a swinging motion. That styling that trended on that kind of monkey bar, pretty easy one. And in terms of if you want to hold your own weight, if you don't feel safe with your partner, that's a really good choice to make. Where you just squat into it rather than swinging through.
I want to highlight how straight Marcus's arm is out ahead of him. So he's creating a lot of width to the slot for her to feel comfortable.
Love her face.
Right. Is there anything else in particular in this second song you want to make sure to go through? Because I know we had that question from Aaron. I definitely want to.
Yeah. I think just kind of finishing out this right here and then good. Because I wanted to add in, Tren does some footwork right here. That this in particular, because of the timing of it, I would say is an advanced level thing. But like if you used a similar timing but didn't do the exact same thing that she did, that's something that you could do at lower levels as well. It's just the timing plus what she's doing, like the way she's styling it, it's definitely more advanced because it's like a boogie walk almost.
Yeah.
But it's styled a little bit differently.
It's like a boogie walk meets swivels.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Yes, but that timing you could do probably in an intermediate level. Just in terms of like if you're just taking steps at that same timing, but that whole thing probably more advanced all-star. And she did one more thing. Can you go back really quickly? So we had these little boogie walk things. And then she also does something that's like really syncopated on the end of this as well. So we have some like really small steps that she takes here. And it's not something that is necessarily like a really obvious thing to hear in the music. But it is something that like if you are like falling forward, more than like if you're falling forward faster than you would just take a step, that's when you compensate in that way to take more steps at a quicker pace. And an adjustment like that is something that's probably more an advanced level. However, just the styling choice in general is something that you could start working on kind of at an intermediate level, just like the extra little shuffling.
Yeah. I think the thing that makes that complicated is when you first start incorporating stuff like that into your dance, the timing of it, making sure you're finishing on the right foot at the right time. And by right, I mean correct.
Yeah.
Extra specific. Finishing on the correct foot at the correct time. So that way you can proceed from there easily. That can be difficult. Especially the more complicated the syncopations you start using and learning. But then you get to a point where it's like, yeah, I may have technically finished on the quote unquote incorrect foot in this situation, but I have the skill to move on from this incorrect foot and it's fine.
Exactly. You can
That's
make adjustment later.
That's the I have earned the right to break the rules kind of situation.
Pretty much.
All right, shall we cease the doodly-doo?
I think so.
All right, cool. What was Aaron's question? Is Aaron still with us? Yes, awesome. Kind of a question for later when you can get to it. In West Coast Swing, we talk about straight lines and legs a lot, but then there's Markus in kind of a bent knee situation. It encourages me. I can bend my knees, which makes it a bit easier on my ankles. But for him, how's that work in terms of technique? You want to take this first?
So, in terms of technique, he's still articulating and everything in the same manner that he does if he were to have straight legs, but it's just because of the bent knees, it cushions it a little bit more, and you can actually be a little bit more specific about the placement and the timing of the like roll through of the foot, the articulation of it. And we did that episode, it was Khalees and Jordan, where we talked about the bent knees versus straight knees.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole episode on that one, but it's something that like you can have straight legs. Like there is a focus on leg lines a lot. However, that's not something that is an all the time thing. So like you don't have to be concerned about having straight legs all the time. I know that some people do teach it that way, but it shouldn't be a concern. Straight legs will cause other issues in some moments if you're trying to keep straight legs rather than just bending them and softening them. So I mean, in general, you want to have straight legs at specific situations. When you are highlighting a leg, that's when you want to have a straight leg, because you want to have a nice leg line, right? And you want to have it like nice and flowing. But if you're not highlighting a leg, like you don't have to worry about it as much. It's more, you want to be comfortable with what you're doing. Not everyone, not everyone's body does well with rolling over a straight leg. It can be really harmful for some people, depending on how your body works. Like, I just don't think that having a straight leg is something that you have to always have.
Yeah, I agree on that 100%. And I want to add that it's really like a moment in time is when straight legs happen. It's like Alicia said. But the other thing that differentiates those who like have earned the privilege of dancing with bent knees versus those who are more beginner dances, who we tell to straighten their legs, that's like a band-aid on what's actually going on. And what we're looking for is that articulation that Alicia was talking about. And you want to think about the whole body as a chain of cause and effect. But when you're talking about foot strikes to weight transfer, you have, depending on whether it's a heel strike or a toe strike or a toe release, a different part of the foot is hitting the floor first. But after the foot has finished flattening onto the floor, that should then affect the knee. And then the knee needs to affect the hip, because that's where you get swing content in your actual body movement. Yep. And if your knee does not affect your hip, that's when it becomes a problem. And furthermore, the legs need to alternate, because if they're both going into a straight position or they're both coming out of a straight position constantly, they're both doing the same thing at the same time, that's also problematic. But the biggest thing is that the knee isn't affecting the hip. And the more skill you have, or the more necessary it is for you to not straighten your legs, like Alicia was saying, depending on just how your body is in this universe that is the crazy place, the wild, as it were, learning how to almost create an artificial straight knee in your muscles. That's this kind of limit that you hit. This is as straight as I am willing to let my knee get. And then using your muscles, have that then affect your hip. So that way you're still getting that natural chain of cause and effect from foot to hip, but you don't have to fully straighten your leg and depend on the actual joint of your knee walking out to create that, the rest of that chain. Did that make any sense, Erin? Everybody?
I got it.
Cool. But we're like almost the same person. So I just want to make sure other people understood.
Yep. The one thing I wanted to add on to that is a lot of times straight legs are emphasized because for people that have not danced before, that are coming into, you know, this dance without any prior experience, having a straight leg isn't something that's natural to you. So the emphasis on straight legs is because it does need to happen at certain points. And if you aren't used to doing it, you won't think about it, you won't do it. That's why there's an emphasis on it, right? It's because if you don't have other experience, you won't do it unless somebody is like, no, you need to have straight legs. But once you get to a point where having straight legs in certain positions is natural for you, that's not something that needs to be a concern all the time. That's my last thing I wanted to say.
Perfect. Awesome. That was like a really satisfying soapbox. So thank you for asking that question there.
Yeah, it was.
I love that stuff because that's just one of those things that I'm like, yes, but every time I hear someone getting that advice, because I'm like, that's not actually gonna help them.
Yep.
I really like that you both mentioned rolling through, because that to me is really like, that's the motion you're doing. It's not straight leg or bent. It's your step is very purposeful when you're walking and you roll through each motion. I did notice there was one point during one of her turns, about 3/4 into our session here, that she actually, it looked like she overextended her leg a little bit past straight. And it was just like, yeah, some people are more flexible than others.
Yeah, she has hyperextended knees, and that is a struggle because I also have hyperextended knees, and sometimes your muscles just choose to not activate, and your knee gives out.
Yep.
My knee's been giving out since I was like a tween, and it's just unfortunate.
I was also kind of noticing in the beginning of the video, and I wanted to get your opinions on it. It looked like her hips were a little bit stationary for the first part of that dance. I was wondering if you noticed that and saw that too.
I'll let you take this first.
Yeah. She was, in my opinion, that was more of a styling choice because of the type of song that she was dancing to. There was a lot more leg action rather than the leg affecting the hip and having a lot of like extra swing, like side to side. So she does that. Her and Markus both do. They will kind of neutralize that hip motion because they have more going on with the legs. And if you, for certain things, if you allow a lot of leg movement to affect the upper body, like to affect the hip and then the upper body, it gets a little chaotic looking. So I, in my opinion, that would probably have been a choice by her because of what she was doing with the leg stylings.
Yeah, I agree 100% because they were really emphasizing hip hop styling, and hip hop styling is based in so much gliding. Even if they're not traveling through space, you want to isolate the legs underneath so it looks like you're not actually putting any weight on your feet. And one of the ways you create that illusion is by not letting it affect the hips. Like if you could imagine, for instance, Michael Jackson having some like Cuban hips going on with his famous moonwalk, that just, no, it ruins the effect. So this is another, you're welcome for that image, people. Enjoy your nightmares tonight. But that's another one of those instances where they've like earned the right to break the rules because they know what they're doing. Whereas these more novice dancers who are just simply being told to straighten their legs is such ambiguous and unhelpful advice because they need to learn the basic rhythmic technique action of West Coast swing, which does roll through not just the feet, but the ankle, the knee, and then into the hip. And then the taller you are, probably then the ribs. To keep going, or otherwise you look like your bottom half and your upper half are two different dancers. It's just my 2 cents on that. Yeah. But you need to have that foundation before you understand when you can break the rules to do a different kind of styling.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
That was a great explanation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you
Thanks
for
for
a great
asking.
question. Love nerdy questions. Oh, I feel so good. These are the conversations I've been having with myself in my head for like 15 years. And then Alicia came along and we became friends. And I'm like, yeah, I could have these conversations with another human being. This is great. And then we're like, shall we share this with the world? Yes. So thank you for all helping us continue with this nerdiness.
Yeah, we love doing this.
Yeah.
Have we announced our next guests?
I don't think so. Our next guest host will be on June 24th, and it shall be the one, the only, Miles Monroe. We're going to be talking about what makes a first place dance. We're going to be analyzing one of his first place dances and one of his second place dances, and analyzing what makes the one the first place and the other a second place. So that's going to be super awesome. Put it on your calendar. He's also a nerd, so it's going to be great. Yeah. Quite excited. Anyways, we will be back next week. We're going to do 3 weeks in a row of analyzing patterns. So next week, we're analyzing telemarks. Get ready for some more soapboxes.
Is that on Thursday?
You won't have to listen to me as much.
Yep. Every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific is when we are live, and then the recordings go up the following Sunday at noon Pacific on our YouTube channel.
Yep. Exactly.
Yep. And I try to edit the hilarity into an actual outtake reel at the end.
They're always good.
I try. Yeah.
There's always things said.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when Christopher Dumont is on. Those are the best outtakes.
Yeah, that was definitely one of my favorites. His like scooting towards his mic.
Oh god.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, cool. Yeah, well, thank you all so much for joining us. This has been a great evening. Lots
Fun
of
as always.
Really great questions. Thank you all so much.
Yes.
We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Good to see you.
I feel like that second song has made it me incapable of saying Wisconsin. Like, I have to really think about it.
Wisconsin. Yes, I think that is the proper spelling of that, Erin.
Well done.
I don't know that I would have used the word bougie, but like props, it was good.
You're the person who taught me how to use that word. I like never used it until we became friends, and now I use it all the time because I don't have my own.
You're welcome.
It's so helpful when they wear bright colored pants.
It really is.
This is so helpful for us. There's
a lot of black.
Thank you, Tren. Black on black on black.
Yep.
Who knows whose limb that is? Forget which episode that was recently, but we literally were like, wait, whose leg is that?
I do remember that, and I don't remember.
Unless that's your brand, is to be kind of a dick, in which case go for it. I guess I made the wrong choices. I should have gone for the brand of being just a tiny bit of a dick. I'm not sure I ever realized how long Markus's fingers are until watching him clap in slow motion.
Yeah, that's something that you don't usually notice.
Right?
Yeah. Speaking of things that you don't usually notice, in the first song, at some point in the background, because the lyrics are "get on the floor," RJ is sitting in the background, and he just ever so casually just leans forward and touches the floor when it says that, and then sits right back up.
He did. Oh, that's beautiful.
It's good.
My upstairs neighbors are suddenly vacuuming rather aggressively. Can you do it?
Nope.
Okay, cool. I feel like my bed is vibrating.
Yeah.
Are you sure that's a vacuum?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. It has the sensation of the ceiling above me being pulled away from me. Like, I don't know what they have. If they have like a Dyson from 10 years in the future, I don't know. They also just vacuum a lot, which anyways, back to West Coast Swing Musicality. And there
Maybe a
might
lengthy
be
episode.
another random Tessa cameo like there was on the John Muller.
Yeah. Disappeared. I expect that from Tessa, though.
Yeah.
She disappears.
Yes. She does have that kind of ninja quality socially, doesn't she?
Does. Yeah.
That is actually how I met her. She was my first pro, back when I was a baby. I had just led for the first time competitively in a novice strictly and got in first place. And then I do a social dance with some other person, and then the song cuts and we stop dancing, we thank each other, and then I feel this kind of aggressive tap on my shoulder from behind me, and I turn around and there's no one here. So I look down, because that's what you do as a tall person. Well, they must be shorter than you. Look down, and Tessa is like right there, looking up at me, batting her eyelashes at me, and that's it. No words. I think she even had her hands, she was holding her hands back, like behind her back, coyly, and she was looking up at me, batting her eyelashes, and I'm like, are you asking me to dance? Keeps batting her eyelashes. I'm like, do you want to dance? Keeps batting her eyelashes, and I'm like, I'll just take her into closed position to see if that's what she wants.
We'll just start. It's fine.
If she thought maybe I already had interacted with pros before, but I was a baby at that time, and that was my first. Yeah. I don't think she's ever. I hope she sees this. She'll be like, "Oh, I had no idea," or she'll be like, "Yeah, I traumatized you in the best way," and I'm like, "Yeah." We've been friends ever since.
Yeah, they're both great.
The pros are animated and fabulous.
Yeah, that reminds me of that one time that Nick just came up behind me and just pulled me onto the floor. He didn't ask.
Just like,
it was not West Coast. It was a 2-step. He didn't ask me if I wanted to dance. I do know how to do that, luckily. Came up and I was like, oh, okay, sure. Guess we're dancing now.
Reminds me of one time a country 2-step came on at Capitol, and Kevin Kane came up to me and asked me to dance. He's like, "You want to make shit up?" And I'm like, "Sure."
Why not?
I have never been more exhausted in my life. That was beautiful, but holy cow, because he's as tall as I am, and so we can book it. I was tired.
Just move past everyone.
Fast lane the whole way.